I have commitments that after the talk, so I couldn't like stay for long. So thanks for that anyway. What I was looking into what this workshop is about, you know, because when Sergio told me if I could present this, I didn't exactly know what was this workshop about. And then after sort of, well, looking through the abstracts of the different presenters, and now after Eduard's talk, I just realized that this is very, very different from anything that you guys are talking about here. So I am not sure to what extent, you know, what I'm going to be saying it's really relevant to many of you. Because it has nothing to do with stochasticity or anything like that. It's not mathematical at all. I am not a mathematician in any way. So
very good. That's
so, yeah,
very good indeed.
Yeah.
What we are expecting.
So yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't know how relevant this is gonna be to many of you, and I, yeah, just feel free to you know, turn off your cameras and do something else if you don't find it interesting. But so yeah, after the sort of main presentation that I was planning to do here, I sort of added some other stuff that was not considered in my abstract to that might be a little bit more related to the topic of this workshop, which is the type of modeling that I am doing now. So hopefully that second part of the talk will be a bit more relevant or interesting to some people. But I am still interested in stochastic aspects to be incorporated into network research, even though I am not doing that like myself right now. So hopefully, you know, by after I talk about whatever I'm gonna be talking about, I could have discussions with other people after the workshop about how we can maybe use this data that I'm gonna present now and models that might be similar to what I am going to show in the second part, to discuss how we could incorporate stochastic processes into this system, which is you know, the sort of systems I am interested in, which are networks of ecological interactions between species, sometimes with a lot of species. And obviously, because these nodes in these networks are populations of real species, they are subject to many stochastic events, you know, like demographic stochasticity or environmental stochasticity. So I think that incorporating that into the model, again, into the models, it's very relevant, and something that I would be really interested in exploring if, you know, if people here feel like we could do something together. So anyway, yeah, for those of you who don't know me, yeah, my name is Miguel, and I am right now based at Swansea University, where I try to lead the computational ecology lab. Some of the work, well, most of the work I'm going to present now, I did while I was at the CNRS in France, at the Theoretical and Experimental Ecology Station, which is in Moulis in Ariège. You know, some of you guys are now in France, so you might know where this is. And yeah, basically what we try to do there in that station is to try to merge empirical data and experimental data analysis with the development of ecological theory to understand persistence and stability in complex ecosystems, mostly, you know, between competing species, but also in complex food webs, which is what I'm going to be talking about. And for this particular project, I paired up with Sergio and some others at the marine station in Las Cruces, which I visited a couple of times. One of those times I actually went down to visit Rolando and gave a talk there about a different thing, which was nice. And it was also partly in collaboration with Sonia Kefi, who is in France, and Nuria Galian. And the whole motivation of looking into the geographical variation of these networks is because when you think about community assembly, and I'm going to try to explain this in sort of general terms, because I realize that there are people here who are not necessarily ecologists. So ever since people started thinking about community assembly in ecology, there are, let's say, two main families of processes that are involved in this. One is the local conditions of patches, which are mainly related to either abiotic factors like environment or the interactions between species. So that's why I'm showing this picture here. So you can see like different patches and different interactions going in these patches. And then the other sort of main family of processes is dispersal between these patches, right? So you have two main types of things: who arrives where, and how whoever arrived there, if they manage to survive there based on environmental filtering or species interactions. And because we know that that across the globe environment changes latitudinally, we expect that this to affect not only the distribution of species, as has been shown in countless studies, but for our particular case, we were interested in understanding how this environmental variation and some other processes might affect the structure of the interaction networks between species, in particular within marine intertidal communities, which is what Sergio and his crew studies down there in Chile. So anyway, these are the aims, but I'm not gonna repeat that again. I sort of explained it already. So basically what we did to try to better understand this sort of latitudinal gradient and related to environmental conditions was use some data that Sergio, Bernardo, Ivy, and some other people had collected across all of these sites in the sort of mid coast of Chile. It goes pretty down south and a little bit north, but it's not the entire range. It's a central part, and the habitats there look more or less like in this picture, and the sort of individual or species that you look at are they look something like this. And what they did was to collect data on all of the species present in these communities, and based on that, they have before this they had published some stuff about how species richness changes across this latitudinal gradient, and not only in the whole community, but also specifically in particular gills, which is relevant for the shape of the network of all of the interactions. So for example, like kelps on the top left of these four plots, then mussels, algae, etc. So starting from this, we started asking questions about how the changes in this, the differential changes across the latitudinal gradient in these different guilds of species actually affected the structure of the interactions between the species. So we use data from those sites in terms of species richness and abundance, and we merged it with data on species interaction that were collected by again by Sergio and others in Las Cruces, and put together by Sonia in a paper back in 2015. And taking that as the full meta web of potential interactions across the whole gradient, we we looked at the species that co-occurred in all of those sites, and based on those co-occurrences, we built networks based on, on the interactions and on the occurrences of those species. Then after building all of these networks across the whole latitudinal gradient, we quantified a bunch of network properties. So again, for those of you who are not really familiar with this side of things, I guess, when we ecologists look at networks of species interactions, we traditionally calculate or quantify a bunch of properties which are, the ones listed here. So we are interested in how long, for example, is the food chain across the whole thing. If you can find modules of subcommunities that are more connected to others than by chance, like, for example, modularity and some other stuff, right? So we quantified all of these properties in these networks, and then to assess how this structure was affected by environmental variability, we look at 5 environmental variables. The long-term mean in the sea surface temperature, the climatology of each site, the fraction of the variance in the temperature, which is not given by the annual cycle of fluctuations across the year. And this is important because it's a measure of how, we know the environment is variable, but sometimes it's variable in more predictable ways than others. So what is the predictability of the fluctuations, which is also an important thing when thinking about, the adaptation of species to particular sites. Then obviously the upwelling index, which is like some sort of a famous measure to look for when you are looking at marine communities, because it's the amount of sort of productivity that emerges from deeper parts of the oceans, and the fraction of days for which temperature was below 14 degrees. This is relevant for all sort of things, but I'm not going to get into that right now. We can discuss it later if you want. But these are sort of the measures that or the environmental conditions that we identified as potentially like affecting or influencing this structure. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of how the networks look like, I mean, this is obviously not in any way quantitative, but you can see, like, for example, if you look at the trophic structure, you can see that towards the north, species tend to organize in let's say 3 or 4 trophic levels, and then as you go south, the basal part of the network becomes like more speciose. So there are more species that are basal species, and this this basically means that the network in general is more biased towards like plants and basal resources. And then we not only analyze the trophic network, which is the one depicting interactions between predators and their prey on the first column here, but we also looked at 2 other types of interaction, positive and negative interactions. And that's why basically we call these multiplex networks, because these are networks that account for different types of interactions at the same time. Positive interactions are like mutualistic interactions, like when when both species have positive effects on each other. And negative interactions are like, for example, competition, like in the intertidal sort of environment. This is a very common type of interaction because a lot of the species, especially those in like at the bottom of the food web, they compete intensely for space. So this is like a very relevant type of interaction to look for. And then what we did with these environmental variables and with the information of the network was to apply some sort of multivariate analysis to understand which ones of the environmental variables were more important. And one of the, I mean, it's not super important that you understand the full details of these plots, but this is just to illustrate the fact that for each different types of interactions, the actual environmental aspect that is more relevant varies across, right? So food webs, for example, the trophic part of the network is mostly structured but by the fraction of days, the fraction of the annual temperature variability, and the actual average of the temperature. Whereas, for example, the mutualistic interactions are mostly only exclusively structured by the fraction of days in which the water is below 14 degrees. So this is sort of, yeah, interesting in the sense that in order for us to have a clear picture of environmental influence on network structure, you actually, this is like a multidimensional problem. So it's not enough to know what are the effects on a single type of interactions to be able to generalize across. This was like one of the main messages of this study, basically. And then obviously, aside from that, we also got like a more quantitative picture of exactly how each of the environmental variables in this plot, in this figure shown as the top boxes, affect how exactly each one of them affect each of the properties of the network structure. So this is just the result of some structural equation models that we did to better understand the pathways through which environment actually affects network structure. So this is for trophic. I'm not going to go into the specific details of this, but if anyone is interested, I'm very happy to meet with you guys one-to-one if you want to keep discussing these things. But in any case, all of these details can be found in our paper that we published last year, which sort of summarizes all of these sort of results, right? So yeah, that is for, let's say, the part of the talk that I was supposed to present here today. But then as I said, after I realized that this is a little bit like outside of the scope of the workshop, I added a little bit of information on some theoretical work that I am currently doing to try to better understand, not only for this particular system, but for ecological networks across spatial scales in general. Some theoretical models that I am currently working with, and that I think that they might benefit from some stochasticity in there. So if you guys see anything interesting here, just let me know and we can have a chat. So basically, the whole sort of motivation of developing these models, the ones I'm going to talk about today, are to try to better understand the ecological and the evolutionary the role of the ecological and evolutionary dynamics in the formation or the structuring or the assembly of these communities. And then how the other sort of motivation I have is that because of these models have some sort of spatial structure, which is explicit in many cases, how this spatial context actually influences both ecological and evolutionary dynamics. So to try to merge these two types of or these two family of mechanisms, as I said, the things that ecologists have identified as important in structuring communities are who gets where, which are like illustrated here by this sort of regional dynamic space context, and who manages to survive, which is illustrated here by this local community dynamics. And the traditional ways in which we model these two things have been relatively isolated. So people use for this, sorry, can you guys see my pointer, by the way? The arrow, yeah, okay, cool. So people mostly simulate this using ODEs, whereas they mostly simulate this using PDEs, right? So there is like some sort of technical gap between the traditional way in which these two things are done. But more commonly, or what I have been coming across with, is that they incorporate terms into ODEs to simulate this. I am not still 100% convinced that this is a good way of doing it, but anyway, that's how we do it now. So, and in terms of the local dynamics, these are all governed deterministically by the interactions between each populations. So this is like a very simple, well, let's call it simple. It's not super simple, but let's call it a simple network dynamic model, which is governed by these equations. And in my particular case, I started with 60 species in that network, which means that the interactions that are shown here as the alpha terms in these equations are basically governed by this interaction matrix, which has a connectance of 0.3, which means that 30% of the links are present. This number is sort of shows that there is like a range of values that have been observed in natural communities. So people doing this sort of modeling, we tend to use the same value for the connectivity. And well, as you can see here, there are two types of interactions, the positive and the negative interactions. And then you have like a growth term, which is given by this R, right? So each one of the species have a growth rate, then intraspecific competition, which is like sort of what limits, you know, like the growth of the same species. And then for the functional response, it depends on the density of both interacting partners. And then there is this beta here, which is a half saturating term, which means that the interaction is stronger when the species are more abundant. And this is just like sort of interference term that basically means that if you are sort of having, or you have the same prey or resources as other species, then your ability to attack that species is less than if you were the only one eating that species. And then, yeah, usually what you do is you get all of these, you know, you draw randomly from around, in my case, a normal distribution, all of the terms in the interaction matrix. And then to incorporate the spatial dynamics between the different patches, because I had, so the model has several patches which are assembled using the same sort of network. Then I incorporate the immigration and emigration terms in this way. So each species is capable of moving from one side to another. And in here, the M matrix is a dispersal matrix, basically. So yeah, once we have that, which is basically like the ecological dynamics, let's call them, which involve both spatial dynamics and local dynamics of interacting species, then we can add what I call like evolutionary dynamics, but in reality, some sort of you know, like stochastic change in the way that species interact. So just for the purposes of illustration, if you have this network in which this link is strong and the others are weak relative to this one, then with some probability, or what I call mutation rate here, I change one of the interaction strengths here, and you can go from a situation like this into a one like this, in which now this species has the strong link, and this link becomes less strong. And by doing that, you can create a picture in which, you know, like a dynamic change in the structure of the network will feed back into the ecological dynamics of the whole meta community. This is a picture just showing, you know, what happens when there is like an evolutionary event. So in this picture, these are the population dynamics through time. And every time you see a peak like this is because one of these sort of evolutionary events happened. And you see how there is some sort of reorganization of the whole community until some sort of more stable state is achieved, basically. And then, so yeah, I ran this for, there is no you know, analytical approach involved here. Everything is simulations. And I ran this for, in this case, 12,000 time steps. And basically, I compare what happens when you have evolution versus when you don't have it. And we can see that in sort of evolving communities, you know, which is sort of expected, but still nice to see that you have more species. So you have the potential for innovation. And the important part is that the species are able to subsist even if they are subject to the whole evolutionary thing, right? Sorry, the whole dynamical ecological side of things. And then the other thing I look at is how that affects beta diversity across the whole landscape, which, if we go back to the Chilean webs across the coast, we sort of see that there is some sort of, even though the communities share some species, there are differences across the communities. And this model is actually able to reproduce differences between local communities that are sort of reflected in the beta diversity across the sites. Then the other sort of pattern I look at is what is the proportion of the different interaction types. Again, thinking about, you know, the multiplex networks in the intertidal communities. This is sort of to try to understand what are the most important interactions in our communities. And here there is a little sort of discrepancy, which I still don't know what's going on between this and empirical data, is that predation seems to be the more important sort of interaction here. Whereas in the intertidal communities, competition is the prevalent interaction type. So there are some, you know, like pieces that still need to come together into the puzzle, but we are getting a better understanding of what might be the mechanisms behind this assembly. Then the number of links per species, which is a measure of complexity of the network. It's higher in evolving communities. And the other interesting thing is that when we look at the stability of the network, which in my case, I measure using the coefficient of variation of the populations, evolving communities seem to be less stable or more fluctuating, which is sort of intriguing, because it means that, you know, when you have eco-evolutionary dynamics, the system that you get, even though it's still feasible, because all of the communities that, you know, that remain at the end, they are still feasible. You know, they are closer to a state of community instability, which is it's one of the debates in ecological research, right? Whether communities are actually stable or you should expect always different types of dynamics or fluctuations. And then when we look at the interaction strength, which is, it has been related to the stability of the network. We see that stronger interactions are observed in the evolutionary case. And in the whereas in the non-evolutionary bit, so the ecological dynamics alone, they seem to favor weaker interactions. So there is a situation here in which evolution seems to be dragging the system towards stronger interactions, which are conducive of less stable dynamics, whereas ecological selection, let's call it, it's dragging the system towards weaker interactions. So there is an interplay there, which, I think that our communities are somewhere in the middle there. And this is the sort of things we are, or I am interested in exploring at the moment. So yeah, that's basically sort of the preliminary results I have for this right now. Again, as I said, this is what I felt could be more relatable to what you guys might be doing. So if you identify places here in which you think stochasticity can be incorporated in some ways, I would be very interested in hearing that. Yeah, well, these are some conclusions that I'm not gonna repeat everything here, but basically I have shown that there is some sort of geographically a structure of the interaction networks, and that can be related to environmental conditions. Mostly to increase productivity as given by different environmental variables that are related to productivity in the oceans. And to some extent, some meta-community dynamic models with a little bit of stochastic variation in the traits in the form of changed interactions. I think it's a promising avenue that can help us better understand the assembly of these communities. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. So I'll be happy to have some questions or discussions.
Thank you, Miguel.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you very much for this interesting problem group. As you know, since you have been working with Sonia, Kefi, and Sergio Navarrete, we have done some first step in changing the model for the local population first, and also for the connection between islands, say. So that is what our main, say, point is to use open system approach to the dynamics, and that implies the use of stochastic processes, of course. So for the local dynamics, first we used simple Levy processes where your ODE is one part, say, of the model, but we have to add some frequent interactions with the environment, and also migrations, and so that changed the time scale of the interactions. And on the other hand, well, in that paper, we worked with Sonia, with Sergio, Pablo Marquet, and another colleague, Sergio Rojas. And there is a second paper where with Pablo Marquet too, Cristóbal Quiñinao, Mauricio Tejo, we worked with, say, migration between patches. But these two papers are just the first step, because we are waiting for additional interactions with marine biologists, and also with mathematicians studying, say, problems connected with stability, persistence, and, well, for instance, quasi-stationary distributions. I think that the talk of Edward should be in a sense, that is the method could be perhaps one day used for the analysis of this kind of networks. Well, but so questions or comments?
For those papers you're talking about, have you guys like tried to do some sort of pattern matching of your results with empirical data?
Well, partially, because, well, yes, Pablo proposed several other papers about empirical data, and Mauricio Tejo, who is a statistician, he also applied statistics to this. But I see that Milan Steli want to speak, so please, Milan.
Thank you very much, Rolando. Thank you, Miguel, for a very interesting talk. I have a question that how much non-linearity you can expect in your evaluations, because you use R-squares which have been reaching like 0.85 in one of the slides. Like statistical, you use R-square and you reach 0.85%. 85%. And how much nonlinear is the process? Is it approximately linearized or is it linear?
Sorry, what is the 85 thing you are referring?
I don't remember the number of the slides, but there was a statistics where you put the R square as an evaluation of the quality of the goodness of feet. It's coming there. It will be close to this, I think. R square.
No, I don't remember. No, I haven't actually. Well, anyway, it's not important. So the non-linearities in the system are mostly due to what you can expect from the deterministic part of the equations. So for the interactions between the species. So this model is commonly used in ecology because it has been shown to be able to create non-linearities in the way that you know the dynamics of the populations affect each one another. But yeah, I don't really have like a number to quantify how much non-linearity I can expect for that. It hadn't occurred to me to actually quantify this, but it could be something interesting to look at. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Any other question? Leonardo, you?
No, I have no question.
Okay. Well, just one last comment, because Miguel, I think you used the data from from Sergio, that is from ESIM in Las Cruces, or for yeah. So because with Sergio we also used those data for the simulations we have been doing of say the dynamics. So I think there is something to explore there. So we have to keep in contact for that.
Yeah, we should definitely keep talking about it.
Yeah.
It looks
same. Yeah.
By what you said, it looks that we are trying to look at the same thing, so with similar tools. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Please, I retract myself. Maybe I have a question. Can you show, please, Miguel, the slide when you explain the way in which you introduce the evolutionary dynamics into this? Okay. so the rate at which you introduce the change in the connection, so in the edges of the graph, say, it is independent of everything else. So it does not depend on the ecological dynamics.
No.
Okay, so there is no feedback between the behavior of the species of the population and the evolutionary dynamics. So,
well, there is feedback because once a change happens, then the ecological dynamics keep running, and that is sort of the way in which the species are, so that you could consider that as natural selection for the species.
Yes, maybe I have not posed the question in the right way. So the question is this: the structure, so the weights in the graph that depicts the relationships, the strength of the relation between the species are not. So this is a question: are not affected by the ecological dynamics. So if suppose, for example, if a species goes extinct, say a population goes extinct, so the population does not change, does not exhibit evolutionary change because of being close to extinction. So
no, even if it's close to extinction, you can still change. I mean, you can still sort of mutate, let's say. So
yeah. Yes, but
I don't know if that is what you are asking, but
so
yeah.
So if it, this is maybe
I mean, one thing.
For example, if you have a species, a predator that fit from I don't know, three different preys, okay?
Yeah.
And observed that in the environment he observed that species, the individual of that species, observed that the density of one of the species, of the prey species, is becoming too low. Is it possible to produce an evolutionary change that shift the diet preference to other species?
Ah, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, I mean,
have you incorporated this in your model?
No, this the model doesn't assume. It doesn't consider. Yeah, I see what you mean.
That's the kind of feedback I refer to.
Yeah. No. The whole thing is purely stochastic across the whole thing.
Okay, so it's pure noise.
Yeah. Well, but if you think about it, there is no reason to expect that in nature a species will produce a random mutation to, if what would happen, what I think would happen in a case like the one you are describing, is that the species will still try to accumulate random mutations, and then it so happens eventually that it creates a mutation in which it drops the connection to the prey that is no longer available, but it's just by chance. And then selection will select that change. So in this case, in this system, if by chance that connection changes weight and the species realizes, like if the species is better off devoting the strength to a different species, then that connection will disappear by selection, if you see what I mean, because the dynamics will make, or the ecological scenario will make those sort of bad connections disappear eventually, because by repeating the evolutionary process, the species will only keep the ones that are good for it. like evolutionarily speaking, you see. So yeah.
Yeah, there is a subject to continue discussing there. Well, in our model, the coefficients depend on the whole population. So the alphas, say, are functions, not just coefficients. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing I was gonna say, that the whole interaction, I mean, even though in the matrix you only have the alphas here, the whole interaction term is this whole thing. So if you have, it will depend not only on the density of the predator, but also of the prey. So when you change the alpha, in reality, if your prey is very low numbers, you could, you know, still deviate to a better prey, if you see what I mean. Yeah. So yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Miguel, again. Well, now we cannot make noise here, but at least, well,